science are actually interlocking constructs of syntax. Well, so that's ordinary language, which seems to define reality through a kind of process of lying about it. For instance, by creating subject-object distinctions, which are, in fact, not true to the matter, but somehow operationally necessary for us to navigate in the kind of lower dimensional space that we inhabit. Then there is the phenomenon of non-ordinary, or what I call visible language. And this is very interesting to me. This is where technology, virtual reality, cybernetics, human-machine interfacing can actually make an impact and explore a frontier. Visual language is a transformation of the physiological impulse towards syntax into a final product, speech, which is not heard with the ears, but beheld with the eyes. And it's very interesting that all our metaphors of clarity of speech are visual metaphors. We say, I see what you mean. He spoke clearly. This means that at the organismic level, we associate a higher signal clarity with visual input. And on DMT and other tryptamine psychedelics, you actually experience the field of language, both heard and self-generated, as something that is visibly beheld. It's almost as though the project of communication becomes high-speed sculpture in a conceptual dimension made of light and intentionality. Well, this would remain a kind of esoteric performance on the part of shamans at the height of intoxication if it were not for the fact that electronics and electronic cultural media and computers make it possible for us to actually create records of these higher linguistic modalities. In other words, it's possible to imagine a virtual reality that was driven by a speech-operated synthesizer where the various parts of ordinary speech, adjectives, modifiers, subjects, and objects, were interpreted by the cybernetic environment as topological manifolds of various shapes, so that speech would then generate a visibly beheld topology. And it's possible to imagine a future world where, in setting up marriage contracts or negotiating corporate takeovers, in other words, in areas where communication, clear expression of intentionality was very important, that people would actually go into the virtual reality to use the virtual language because its capacity for conveying intent would be much greater than ordinary spoken language. In other words, it's not for nothing that Plato connected up the notion of the good, the true, and ultimately the beautiful. And the beautiful of those three concepts is the primary concept because it is visibly beheld, because it is seen. This is the great convincing power of the psychedelic experience, that it ultimately appeals to us through the sense that we value most, that we existentially relate to as the most authentic, and that is the visual. Visible language is a kind of telepathy, because you see, if I make a statement in visual language and then you and I regard my statement, we are somehow in the act of regarding made one, because meaning is not being created out of interiorized dictionaries, which we each consult in the privacy of our own mind, but rather meaning is a visible manifold in the public domain. Meaning goes public, and the differences between people then decline toward being insignificant. It's a kind of a final confirmation of the McLuhan apotheosis. And I think visible language is coming. Life in the imagination is to be the life of creativity carried on through these virtual environments driven by linguistic engines. Like that. Starships of the future, in other words, the vehicles of the future which will explore the high frontier of the unknown will be syntactical vehicles. The engineers of the future will be poets. This is what virtual reality holds out to us, the possibility of walking in to the constructs of the imagination. In a way, culture is that. I mean, our cities, bridges, highways, airliners, and art galleries are condensations out of the imagination, but at tremendous cost, because we must make them out of matter. Once we can make them out of light, out of electrons, then we won't build skyscrapers 120 stories high. We'll build them as high as we want. Roof height will no longer be a factor ruled by cost effectiveness and gravity. It will be a parameter ruled by the imagination, as will all other parameters. And then we will discover what man truly is, when we are able to erect, stabilize, share, and explore our dreams in a kind of virtual hyperspace that, carefully analyzed, is seen to be linguistic. That's what its connectors are made out of. That's what its ferroconcrete and steel is the edifice of language. This is what the stuff of the imagination is made of. And I think this is what we're moving toward. The psychedelic shamans have always known this. Now the psychedelic underground art community points toward this goal and leads the way. This is a segue from yesterday's discussion about visible language. The notion being that, let me review what yesterday was about. It was about the idea that if we could see language, if language were a project of understanding that used the eyes for the extraction of meaning rather than the ears, that it would be a kind of telepathy. There would be both a fusion of the observer with the object observed and with the person communicated with. the place in nature where